The disappearance of a loved one always sparks anxiety and a flood of dark thoughts, but even the worst suspicions could not have prepared the Maddill family for the truth hidden behind Shannon's sudden vanishing. At first glance, her husband Joshua seemed to be the perfect caring spouse. He actively joined the search, supported the family, and gave them hope. But who could have imagined that behind this facade was the very monster living under the same roof? On a November evening. At first, Brett did not pay much attention, thinking his sister had been delayed at rehearsal or was dealing with work matters. But as time passed and the night drew closer, Shannon still had not shown up. Calls went unanswered, messages unread. Gradually, mild concern turned into a heavy feeling of dread. Late in the evening, Brett returned home with a heavy heart. A persistent thought haunted him: something was wrong. The next morning brought no relief. Shannon still did not answer. He kept calling. Finally, he decided to tell his parents, hoping they might know something he didn't. Morning only intensified Brett's anxiety. He tried again and again to call his sister, but her phone remained silent. The silence became increasingly frightening. At one point, he turned to his parents, hoping they had some explanation or at least some information, but they too had no idea what might have happened. Her mother tried to stay calm. She searched for logical explanations for her daughter's absence. Perhaps her schedule had changed suddenly, or maybe she had to work a late shift, since the life of an actress was unpredictable. Sometimes she thought Shannon might simply have fallen asleep after an exhausting day and hadn't heard the phone. These assumptions sounded like comfort, but deep down the parents knew such versions were unconvincing. Shannon had always been responsible, especially when it came to family and career. She never allowed herself to disappear without contact, knowing how important it was for her loved ones to know she was safe. Even in her busiest times, she always found a moment to respond or at least warn of a delay. That's why her silence felt abnormal, as if something serious had happened to her. To ease her worries, her mother left another voicemail. In it, she gently said that no one was angry, that they were just worried and wanted to make sure Shannon was all right. But that call also went unanswered. Instead of relief, an even deeper fear settled in. Behind this silence lurked something terrible. When the anxiety became unbearable, the family decided to act. Together with Joshua, Shannon's husband, they went to the police station. The family knew that Shannon was supposed to travel from Edmonton to Calgary, and they feared something might have happened on the way. They begged the authorities to begin the search immediately. But the reaction of the police was cold. Officers explained that an adult has the right to go wherever they wish and is not obliged to report to relatives. The family tried to explain. Shannon would never just vanish. She always kept in touch and never allowed herself to disappear without warning. To them it was obvious. Something serious had happened. Only after much persuasion did the police agree to take the first steps. They checked local hospitals and initiated a search operation. But all efforts were in vain. No accidents involving her, no trace of Shannon at any medical facility. The days blurred into painful waiting. Every morning began with hope and ended in emptiness. The family felt themselves sinking into an abyss of uncertainty, with no answers, only pain and growing despair. Several days after the disappearance, Joshua suddenly told the police he had found his wife's phone. It was at home, in the pocket of her pants. This immediately seemed odd. Why would an actress, preparing for a trip, leave her phone behind in unused clothing? Soon after, he announced another discovery: Shannon's car. It was parked not far from the house, as if intentionally left there. Police examined the vehicle but found no signs of struggle or violence. Meanwhile, the family was clinging to any lead. Then investigators received disturbing photos. In a Calgary park, images of a young woman with red hair covering her face had been attached to trees. The resemblance to Shannon was striking, leaving both the family and police in shock. It felt like someone was mocking their pain. Search efforts focused on Big Creek Natural Park. Police, volunteers, search dogs, and even a helicopter were deployed. The family and Joshua joined in, hoping to find a clue. For 2 days, dozens of people scoured the area, leaving no corner untouched. But the outcome was devastating. The photos turned out to be part of an art project by college students. When they realized the impact their work had caused, they voluntarily went to the police to explain. For Shannon's family, it was a crushing blow. The hope that had flared so brightly was suddenly extinguished. Days went by without results. Joshua eventually shared a memory he had previously kept to himself. A few months earlier, Shannon had called him in tears, saying she wanted to jump off a bridge. At the time, she had just failed an audition she had placed high hopes on. Devastated, she said she no longer saw meaning in her life. Joshua claimed he had calmed her down and talked her out of it. But now his words raised a terrible question. What if that old wound had reopened? Perhaps her disappearance was not due to kidnapping or accident, but to a desperate choice. Police took this version seriously. They organized searches of nearby rivers and bodies of water, especially near large bridges. Divers examined the bottoms, while ground teams scoured the banks, hoping to find the slightest clue. But this lead also went nowhere. No body, no belongings of Shannon were found. Time passed, with no witnesses and no tangible evidence. By early 2015, nearly 6 months after her disappearance, police were leaning more and more toward the darkest scenario, though they avoided saying it openly to spare the family further pain. 6 months of fruitless searching dragged on like an eternity. That was when Detective Christine Widd, a seasoned homicide investigator known for her keen eye and determination, took over the case. She had solved countless complex cases, and now it was her turn to unravel the mystery of Shannon's disappearance. Christine began by studying Shannon's surroundings. She knew that the answers often lie closest to the victim. The first person she turned her attention to was Joshua, from the very beginning. But Christine's experienced eye noticed things others missed. His stories were sprinkled with small inconsistencies, seemingly minor details, yet together they painted a troubling picture. Slowly, Christine became convinced that behind the image of the caring husband lay something darker. June 2nd, 2015, after 7 months of endless searching, Christine and her colleagues arrived at Joshua's house. This time they had warrants to search the premises, seize his phone, and impound Shannon's car. It was A.T. When they knocked on the door, Joshua delayed opening it. From inside, they heard his voice. "Just a minute, I'll be right out." The pause seemed suspicious. Christine sensed tension, as if he was buying time. Finally, the door opened, and instead of the calm man they expected, they found someone broken. With a trembling voice and tears in his eyes, Joshua confessed, "I killed Shannon." At the time of Shannon's disappearance, the couple had been married only 7 months, yet their relationship was already in deep crisis. Outwardly, they appeared to be a normal young couple, but behind closed doors their union was crumbling. Investigators discovered that Shannon and Joshua were in an open marriage, his idea. Formally, both were free to see other people. For Shannon, however, it was a reluctant compromise, a way to hold on to her husband rather than a true desire for freedom. Joshua, on the other hand, fully embraced the arrangement. He dated several women, some of whom Shannon even knew personally. At first, she tried to act indifferent, but over time the charade became unbearable. She wanted to end the arrangement and return to a traditional marriage. Joshua agreed, but only in words. Soon he locked his phone, something he had never done before. Shannon eventually gained access and found messages between him and his lover. In those conversations, he talked about divorce and promised they would be together soon. For Shannon, it was a devastating betrayal. She began to consider moving away to start a new life without him. She was planning to return to Edmonton. Although they still lived under the same roof, their lives barely intersected. She worked nights performing stand-up, while he lived by day. The house had grown cold and tense. Investigators established that Shannon's last known activity was on November 27, 2014. After that, she stopped using her bank card, phone, and social media. The final signal from her phone was traced the following morning in an alley. Shortly afterward, Joshua found her phone at home, a detail that only deepened suspicion. Bit by bit, everything pointed to Joshua. But investigators still needed solid proof to confirm their suspicions and close the case. When investigators finally got Joshua to confess, a chilling story emerged. He explained that it happened one evening when he came home and found Shannon on the couch. Their conversation quickly escalated into an argument. She accused him of betrayal, of lying, of ruining their marriage. Her words grew sharper, her voice louder. Joshua tried to silence her. At first, he covered her mouth, but Shannon fought back, bit him, and kept shouting. In rage, he grabbed her by the throat and began to strangle her. Eventually, her body went limp. Realizing she was no longer breathing, Joshua panicked. He tried to revive her, but his efforts were futile. Instead of calling for help, fear of exposure overwhelmed him. He decided to hide what he had done. At first, he placed Shannon's body in a container outside the house, covering it with garbage bags. Later, when the ground thawed, he buried her in the yard. He decided to hide what he had done. At first, he placed Shannon's body in a container outside the house, covering it with garbage bags. Later, when the ground thawed, he buried her in the yard. For nearly 8 months, Joshua lived with this secret. He convincingly played the role of the grieving husband, joining searches, comforting the family, speaking to the press and police. Relatives trusted him and even admired his devotion. No one imagined that the man who swore he loved Shannon was the same one who had taken her life and hidden the truth in his own backyard. When the truth came out, Shannon's family was struck with indescribable shock. All that time, Joshua had been right beside them, helping with searches, hugging her mother, consoling her brother, speaking of hope. In reality, he had been coldly concealing the crime. 2 years after the tragedy, the trial began, drawing intense media attention. Journalists reported on every hearing. Newspapers ran bold headlines. On the defendant's bench sat the man many had once thought of as a devoted husband. Joshua was initially charged with second-degree murder, which carried the possibility of life in prison. At the hearings, he pleaded guilty but insisted he had not intended to kill his wife. It had happened in a fit of rage during an argument. His lawyers argued that it was not premeditated but an impulsive act.
Testimony helped reconstruct the events of that night. The couple had a heated quarrel. Joshua tried to make peace through intimacy, but Shannon refused. Worse, she told him she regretted their marriage and wanted it to end. Those words were the breaking point. In fury, he grabbed her by the throat. When his strength waned, he used a belt to finish what he had started. After the murder, he hid her body in a plastic container, later burying it in the yard once spring came. Experts confirmed that she had died from strangulation and had no other serious injuries, consistent with his confession. In 2017, the court sentenced him to life in prison, with eligibility for parole after 10 years. For Shannon's family, this was another blow. They felt the punishment was too lenient for a man who not only killed their daughter and sister but also deceived everyone for months. To them, his behavior showed chilling coldness. He did not deserve a second chance. Years passed, but the Maddill family's pain never subsided. The memory of Shannon's smile, her dreams, and her unfinished plans lived on in their hearts. Every day, they were reminded that everything was stolen by the man she had trusted most. When Joshua applied for parole, it was another devastating blow. The family had to relive the ordeal, attend hearings, and once again tell the world what he had done. They reminded the judges of the danger his release could pose. To them, his words of regret rang hollow. He had lied for too long, playing the role of the devoted husband while Shannon's body lay in their yard. Society now faced a difficult question. Can someone who coldly took the life of the person he called his love ever be forgiven? Are words of remorse and confessions enough to redeem such a crime? Or are their acts so terrible that no amount of regret can erase them? For Shannon's family, the answer was clear. Her life was cut short far too soon, and no remorse could bring her back. They vowed to do everything in their power to ensure that people like Joshua never get a second chance.